There's been some big changes to ISAs in recent weeks, and the big new one that we're going to unpack today is the potential British ISA. Jeremy Hunt unveiled the new British ISA at the recent spring budget, and now the dust has settled somewhat, I wanted to dive into whether or not this new addition to the ISA environment is actually a good thing, or it's just a political push to try and win votes, and essentially looking like, they're doing something useful for once. But essentially, it's a brand new type of ISA to add to the selection that we already have. It's a brand new allowance as well, with £5,000 added on top of the £20,000 that we currently get. So in total, we'd now have £25,000 each tax year to contribute. Well, look, hang on a second, it's not party time just yet. Why is it called the British ISA when ISAs are essentially just already British? Well, essentially, it's because when you invest in the new ISA, you can only invest into British companies, whilst you can continue to invest internationally in your standard stocks and shares ISA. The reason the government have done this is because they want to boost investment into British business. Now, on the surface, this sounds great, but in this video, we're going to find out whether or not it will actually work. So, will it? Well, according to data from HMRC, there are only 3.9 million stocks and shares ISAs as of 2022 in the UK, meaning that's less than 5% of the population. We also know that only 15% of the UK actually max out their ISAs each year. So of that 3.9 million, there's only 600,000 people potentially, plus others that actually invest and save, that this actually really affects. So even if we inflated that to 1.5 million, let's say, that's still just 2.2% of the nation. So what about actually boosting the economy? Investments into the UK have fallen by 6% according to the ISA consultation report, which was put out in line with the spring budget. This report is actually also diving into whether or not the British ISA can or even will ever happen. So yes, it could have just been a political charade to boost ratings. The biggest factor is, should the Conservative government lose this election and a Labour government came in, would it likely come to power and keep it? Who knows? The UK has massively underperformed in recent years, mainly due to things like Brexit, Liz Truss, COVID, plus a lack of innovation in the tech sector versus the S&P 500 in the US. You can kind of see why when you match these two graphs up. Like, why would I invest into the FTSE 100, which has until recently been packed full of old money companies that churn out a few percent if we're lucky, versus the kind of sexy S&P 500 driven by your Apples, your Teslas and your Microsofts? When you scan out and you see the results, it kind of answers itself. So I can't see why investment into British business is good from an investment standpoint right now, but I can certainly see why it might be for economic growth. So current ISAs and how they work. So right now, the current ISA environment is £20,000 contribution. You can split this across your cash ISAs, essentially just savings accounts, lifetime ISAs, although that has a max of £4,000 a year to get the government bonus, and of course the stocks and shares ISAs too. You use your current stocks and shares ISA, which is essentially the vehicle to take you to the market and get your stocks, funds and bonds, with the other big change coming from Jeremy Hunt in the recent spring budget that you can now invest into multiple stocks and shares ISAs inside the same tax year, when previously it was just one. Now, currently when investing into your stocks and shares ISA, I can buy shares or funds or bonds from anywhere in the world, so Japan, China, USA, Brazil. Essentially, it doesn't really matter as long as my provider has actually listed them. So what exactly would be the pros and cons of adding a British ISA to the mix here, only allowing British investments? Pros. A big one is that it will reduce the tax paid on money an individual makes on their investments. So this can be in terms of both capital gains or income from dividends. Putting more money in people's pockets is generally a good thing for those individuals and of course the economy too. The second, of course, is the potential extra money going into UK businesses, which would mean a decent dump into the economy. Roughly around 8 billion a year is what's predicted here, which isn't small change. The cons. The main criticism of the policy is that it dictates to people what they can and can't invest in. The UK stock market accounts for less than 4% of the global stock market. Therefore, restricting investors to just a slice of this is very limited, even if it's only £5,000, for example. So the other weakness to the plan here is that the majority of people do not use their full ISA allowance, as we discussed earlier. So the £5,000 is essentially redundant. There could also be arguments and controversy over what counts as a British stock, or indeed funds that do cover that. So many PLC-based trusts like Temple Bar, for example, mainly hold their assets in Britain, but they also hold international companies. So would it being a PLC, would this still be counted? Would it not be counted? At this moment, it feels like they've just chucked some numbers in to make it sound pretty good, but in reality, it's pretty difficult to pull this off. The logic behind this. Now, one thing I immediately thought of is that my personal exposure to the UK market currently sits around 15% in my portfolio, and as we've discussed earlier, with the performance of the UK market in recent years, I'm not really sure that I'd want to increase that if I wanted to see any significant gains over the coming years. Now, I know that past performance is not a future indicator of a success, but essentially it's what we have to go on. Some would say the UK is enormously undervalued right now when you look at the PE ratio of the average stocks in the UK versus the USA, and it's pretty easy to draw that comparison. But we've had one hiccup after another. Brexit, COVID, Liz Truss, and now a recession, plus political uncertainty is on the horizon too. So it doesn't exactly paint the UK in the best light going forward. So if I was to max out my ISA, would I keep my current 15% and then add another £5,000 on top, essentially bringing me up to like near 30%? I highly doubt it. For those that can afford the full £25,000 allowance, I can see a large portion of others spotting this exact same thing and essentially selling their UK exposure in their current stocks and shares ISAs and moving it over to the British ISA. So then that would mean that not much extra money is actually flooding into the economy, it's just being moved around. So sure, I know that we might see a little bit extra come in, but right now this is a big stumbling block for me when you look at it logically. So it's very hard to say whether this is actually going to boost the economy at all, so that £8 billion figure. And I just think that there's a lot more thinking that needs to be done around how this is actually going to be structured, in my opinion. Now, when could the British ISA actually arrive? Well, a consultation on how to design and deliver the British ISA has started, as we discussed earlier, and that will run until the 6th of June. The government is inviting responses to the consultation until that point, so savers won't actually be able to take any action on the British ISA until after that point. When the consultation ends, the government will then need to review the responses and then set out the final rules, get the providers on board, get those set up, and at the earliest we might see something late 2024, maybe 2025. The providers is the big thing here because they're going to need time to set up that product, and according to investment platform AJ Bell, April 2025 is actually the likely earliest we could possibly see it, and it would actually be available to customers. In between that, we're likely to have had a general election, meaning the arrival of the British ISA very much depends on the party that actually gets into power. If this is a lead policy for the Conservatives, I can honestly see Labour just going, hey, no, we're not doing it, I'm tearing it up, and I actually wouldn't blame them, to be honest, because it affects such a small number of people. So what should they have done? Well, if you want to get markets moving and people investing, then education is actually paramount number one for me. According to a study by FinCap, over 20 million people in the UK currently don't feel confident managing their money. And that's just managing money. So does that even include investing? I don't think so. In my opinion, that's much higher. As we know from earlier, only 3.9 million people in the UK have a stocks and shares ISA. If we got that number up to say 5 or 10 million, I think that would actually have a much larger impact on the British economy. It's going to put more money into British companies, more money back into the pockets of the everyday people from the investments, and essentially that's going to come down the chain into goods and services. Now, I'm not the government, but I don't know about you, but doesn't that pretty much seem the logical solution here? Education. Interestingly, building wealth seems to be an ongoing battle, and that's why I've created a video that shows the optimal way to start building wealth from start to finish. The video should have just popped up on your screen now, and I'll see you over there. Thanks a lot.